Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to see this theater so full. I expected nothing else for Wim Wenders. I'm Giuliana Bruno, and I'm a professor in visual and environmental studies here at Harvard University. I'm delighted to be here today with you in this really beautiful theater. Looks good from this perspective. To introduce Wim Wenders, the 2018 Norton Professor of Poetry. And first, an important announcement. The order and times of his lectures have changed. The visible and the invisible will be delivered today, while Poetry in Motion will be on April 9 at 2 o'clock instead of 4 o'clock. And most important, let me thank Mr. Wenders and the Norton Lecture Committee for the wonderful opportunity they're offering us to explore ways of seeing through film. Wim Wenders is indeed an envisioner, widely recognized as one of the world's most innovative and thoughtful film directors. He initially set out to be a painter after studying philosophy and medicine, and he channels his creativity across a broad range of media, including watercolor and ink drawings, collage, photography, and video art, as well as, of course, cinema. He's also a prolific writer, author of significant books such as Emotion Pictures, and most recently, The Pixels of Paul Cézanne, which speaks of a career of generous collaborations with artists, photographers, choreographers, designers, musicians, and writers, as well as filmmakers. Being particularly sensitive to the relation between visual media and sound art, Wenders has even directed opera. His abiding curiosity and knowledge of music and dance has led some of his soundtracks to gain cult status, as with the famous revival of Cuban music from his 1999 documentary, Buena Vista Social Club. Alongside his resounding work in film, Wenders has made moving image installations and worked with electronic images. His Polaroid and panoramic photographs have been a subject of numerous museum and gallery exhibitions. You can see a series of these mnemonic pictures composed like archaeological dioramas collected in a book appropriately titled Pictures from the Surface of the Earth. The surface of the Earth is indeed the subject of the art of Wim Wenders. The various forms of artistic expression he practices are connected by an interest in what has been called traveling cultures, the crossing of borders, the melding of cultures, the displacement of travel, and the location of self. Wenders, by his own admission, is interested in, quote, space, landscape and cities, landscape portraits, end quote. And as he claims, quote, landscape has everything to do with cinema, end quote. This is an artist who's indeed affected by a form of topophilia, a syndrome that manifests itself as a love of place. For Wenders, we not only live in cities, the cities live in us. And with him, we're constantly on the road. We have traversed numerous geographic sites from Paris all the way to Paris, Texas. We have traveled with taciturn, melancholic vagabonds in a series of movies that portray kings of the road and, well, a few queens, too. In the company of interesting men and women, and even young girls, as in Alice in the City, we have navigated the surface of the Earth, not only in space, but also in time, all the way until the end of the world, the title of his futuristic road movie from 1991. A form of flânerie, a peripatetic quest, pervades Wenders' cinema of travel. In his film, narrative moves in an inquisitive, perambulatory mode. Walking turns into thinking. Roaming is exploring. To wander is ultimately to wonder. This restless quest to reflect on the habitability of sight, on the state of things, as another of his films is titled, is often a touch mnemonic as well as melancholic. As Wenders describes it, it involves always, and I quote, a work of mourning which provides the energy to travel inside the sight, to know it and describe it filmically, end quote. His most topophilic film, may be the very celebrated Wings of Desire from 1987, whose German title refers to the sky above Berlin. Here, we travel with angels throughout the city, from the sky to street level. The nomadic filmic angel, portrayed by the great Bruno Ganz, is the very embodiment of Walter Benjamin's Flaneur, and also recalls his angel of history, a figure who struts forward by his looking backwards. Echoes of Benjamin's words, which pervade the film, are even whispered by readers in its enchanted library scenes. At some point, then, black and white shifts into color. Optical views become haptic touch, as Ganz's angel chooses to incarnate himself as a mortal in order to touch, to sense, to feel the texture of human life and embody its pain. With this chromatic journey through Berlin, Wim Wenders created a historic document, an architectural record of a city that no longer exists. This film is testament to the destruction of the war, to ruins and voids that had been eradicated and are now filled by new construction. With the passage of time, then, the city symphony of Wings of Desire clearly has turned into a work of mourning. Whether making fiction or documentary, Wim Wenders, the filmmaker, acts as a cultural historian of urban space and even a practitioner of architecture. He uses the tools of filmmaking as if he were a draftsman or a landscape designer, at times a view painter, or even a map maker. We're here today in the company of a great architect of visual styles. To travel with Wenders across the surface of the earth is to learn the very art of fabricating space. And with his 1989 film, Notebook on Cities and Clothes, fashion enters into urban fabrication. In it, Wenders meets the designer Yohji Yamamoto and discover they have much in common. Both film director and designer craft a language of bodies moving in space. They both envision visual fabrics and styles. Fashion and filmmaking are knotted together when in making things move, they design time. Wenders shows us that the two forms even share a similar craftsmanship. A film, like a dress, is assembled in a physical montage of parts, cut and pasted together in the process of editing. In film and fashion, meaning is threaded and woven through materials and textures, actual pieces of fabric or screen fabric. For Wenders, then, to make a film is a textural, even sartorial process. And while creating and engaging sartorial architectures, he continues to reflect on surface matters, on material techniques, probing new means of expression as the craft of filmmaking changes and celluloid becomes a thing of the past. In Notebooks on Cities and Clothes, back in 1989, the director asked a question still very much on our mind. Can we trust the electronic image? With Lisbon Story, made 5 years later, he further questioned new media. Friedrich, the protagonist of this film, struggles with his role as a filmmaker. His journey through Lisbon becomes an elegy to cinema and to the urban panoramas of the silent era. But new media are embraced when this character straps a camera to his back and blindly tapes a vision of the city to be archived for future generations. In 1994, Wenders looked ahead to our time, when cameras are no longer attached to the human eye, but rather move with the hand and even without a body. In this way, he's asking us to question film as an optical toy, challenging the ocular-centric quality of imaging, of cameras that only point and shoot. He tells us not to be afraid of more touchy and random types of picture. Most prophetic in this sense is the voyage we take into the future of 1999 with the science fiction film Until the End of the World. In this ultimate global road movie, the voyager is a woman, Claire, who chases a man across the surface of the earth, traveling to 15 cities in 8 countries on 4 continents. Foreshadowing our current obsession with GPS and driverless vehicles, Until the End of the World presents cars that are driven virtually, directed by computerized maps. But when an impending nuclear disaster drives everyone to flee on the very same road, our Claire goes off the road. Turn off your GPS. Don't always follow Google Maps or Waze. A detour can change the direction of your life. It did so for Claire. Going beyond the end of the map zone, she found love and discovered the dream world of visionary technology. Our character finds herself strapped to an ocular device that very much resembles the prosthetic glasses of today's virtual reality. And in the end, by way of portable screens, Claire can even look into her dreams. Going off the road, she becomes capable of exploring her own psychic map. Yet, the film concludes, addiction to handheld screens is destructive as well as constructive. With vendors, then, the past can dream the future. In recent works, it directly engages the electronic arts, reflecting on the current state of things in our digital world. With Pina, filmed in 3D in 2011, he pushed the potential of visual and oral technology to document dance. This moving portrait of the extraordinary choreographer Pina Bausch takes deeply inside the world. Here, 3D is not a simple immersive technique, but a truly tactile, haptic technology. Absorbed into choreography, you feel the bodies in motion as if they were touching your own skin. So ultimately, space is a very touchy affair for Wenders. This is not the case only for his films, but also for his gallery-based moving image installations. Consider, in conclusion, the 3D video installation that he produced for the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2010. For this visual investigation of a futuristic building designed by the firm Sana, Wim Wenders wrote, "If buildings could talk, some of them would sound like Shakespeare, others would speak like the Financial Times, yet others would praise God or Allah. Some would just whisper, some would loudly sing their own praises, while others would modestly mumble a few words and really have nothing to say. Some are plain dead and don't speak anymore." Well, if anyone on the surface of the earth could make a building talk, that would be Wim Wenders. And here he is talking to us today. Please join me in welcoming the amazing Wim Wenders.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Juliana. It's such an honor speaking to all here in Harvard in the context of the Norton Poetry Lectures. But hey, the pressure was on a few weeks ago when I had to announce the titles of what I was going to talk about before I really collected my thoughts about the subjects. After all, I chose the visible and the invisible for the first occasion today. Sorry for those who expected poetry in motion. You have to wait for a week, I still have to write it. I chose the visible and the invisible, realizing it was going to be a challenge for me as well as for you. But I believe in the formative power of titles. After all, some of my film titles have pulled me through journeys into unknown lands. And as today, in my own country at least, Easter Monday is a holiday, the subject of the visible and the invisible even gained an extra dimension. Here we go. When I was a film student, and soon afterwards as a hopeful filmmaker, I was convinced that films were strictly the realm of the visible. Of course, I was a fervent socialist. After all, it was 1968. And so my creed was that films dealt with the material world, period. The invisible was for the romantically or religiously inclined. This was confirmed when I read Theory of Film, The Redemption of Physical Reality by the famous German film theorist Siegfried Kracauer, a book he wrote in New York, by the way. Films were basically concerned with saving things in general and the entire outer reality of the world in particular. And I was going to be part of that important mission. Starting right away with my first feature film, The Goalie's Anxiety at the Penalty Kick. Some of you might have seen it the other day at the Harvard Film Archive. This was a story about a man who is thrown off his course. In this case, a goalkeeper who gets a red card and is eliminated from the game. He happens to be in a foreign city, Vienna, so he starts drifting around, goes to movies, eventually follows the cashier girl of the theater and spends the night with her. The next morning, in a fit of sheer confusion and disorientation, he kills her, almost accidentally, even more or less involuntarily. It just happens. He falls asleep right afterwards, out of utter alienation, and not knowing what to do next. When he wakes up, he covers his tracks, travels to the border, in this case of former Yugoslavia, where he visits an old acquaintance and does nothing except wait for the police to eventually catch up with him. I was 26 years old. I loved the movies of Alfred Hitchcock and wanted my first film to look just like them. In its shots, its film language, in its mood. Of course, nothing much happened in my story, contrary to the movies of the great British master. But when the film was shown for the first time at the MoMA in New York in early 1972, in a series called New Directors, New Films, the critic of the New York Times called it an existential thriller. Wow. That made me feel pretty good. Finally, I was understood. Or maybe it was the other way around. I finally understood what I had done. I'd like to show you two scenes from towards the end of the film. Here's the first one. Bloch, the goalie, enters the kitchen of his acquaintance who runs a country inn. I hope that the way my main character deals with the realm of the visible, the physical, shows my fascination, if not obsession, with things and their surface.
Der Sohn des Gutsbesitzers ist ein guter Freund von mir,
Was macht er?
der Alfons. Wenn der was macht, dann will er es immer gleich ganz perfekt machen. Vor ein paar Monaten zum Beispiel, da hat er sich einen Sportwagen gekauft. Er hat dann auch gleich eine Rallye mitgefahren und ist auf Anhieb Dritter geworden. Gestern Abend, da habe ich ihm die Autoschlüssel abgenommen. Er trinkt ein bisschen viel. Zu Fuß war ihm dann der Weg zu weit. Er verwaltet den Besitz. Sein Vater liegt mit einer Lungenkrankheit in einem Sanatorium.
Bei welcher Zahl fängst du an zu zählen? Ich habe mir in letzter Zeit angewöhnt, immer erst bei 2 mit dem Zählen anzufangen. Ich zähle die 1 nicht mehr mit. Beim Überqueren der Straße wäre ich heute Morgen fast unter ein Auto gekommen, weil ich hatte das erste Auto überhaupt nicht beachtet, sondern auf das zweite, weiter entfernte geschaut. Von einem Ei, einem Brötchen und einer Tasse Kaffee am Morgen werde ich zum Beispiel nicht satt. Das ist fast so, als hätte ich überhaupt nicht gefrühstückt. Erst das zweite Ei zählt. Ohne Worte.
Warum stehst du dauernd auf? Setzt dich wieder hin, stehst wieder auf, setzt dich wieder hin, fasst was an, lässt es wieder los, fasst was anderes an. Was hast du denn? Was ist los mit
Soll ich
dir?
mal nach dem Kind schauen?
Nein. Es hat schlecht geträumt. Gleich kommt es und will ein Stück Kuchen haben.
Was machst du denn da unter dem Bett?
Die fliegen unter dem Kopfkissen.
Halt den Apfel mit beiden Händen. Geh, fahr mit deinem Dreirad.
Fliegen?
Die Kinder von gegenüber schlafen hier, solange die Leiche aufgebahrt ist. Am Abend, da schießen sie immer mit Einweggummis auf die Fliegen, die gegenüber an der Wand sitzen. Und die Fliegen, die sie getroffen haben, die legen sie dann unter das Kopfkissen.
Was kann ich dafür?
Jetzt sind wir allein.
Und das Kind?
Das zählt nicht.
Wie vögeln denn die Leute auf dem Land?
Geh raus mit dem Dreirad, ja? Nein.
Vorgestern habe ich eine Frau im Autobus gesehen. Die hatte einen Blutfleck hinten am Kleid.
As you've seen, Bloch has to touch everything as if that could help to constantly affirm his existence. He certainly appears utterly clumsy and heavy-handed. Here's the second scene, and please pay attention to one frame of it. All during the shooting of the goalie, at the time done on 35mm color negative, we kept one loaded magazine of film stock apart. And if ever I'd see a detail, an object or something in the landscape that I liked, often not at all related to the storyline, we'd shoot these things on this artsy-fartsy magazine, as we called it. Slowly, over the course of the filming, it got used up or filled up, all 10 minutes of it. These loose elements turned out to be very helpful in the editing to separate scenes or to create time transitions. At the end of the editing, there was just one shot left. An apple hanging in a tree. We had gone through a lot of trouble shooting that apple, actually building a platform for the camera to get its close-up. I was determined to use that shot, while my editor Peter saw no place for it. We tried it in several scenes until I finally found a spot where I thought it would fit. Peter didn't like it. "Why is the apple there?" he kept asking. "The character doesn't even look at it. The apple is just hanging there, totally out of place. People will only be confused by it, trying to find an explanation for it, but you and I know it means nothing." "It doesn't have to mean anything," I said. "It's just an apple. It's a real thing. It's there, without a purpose. That's enough for me." The excerpt starts with a scene between the goalie and two hairdressers. Otherwise, my apple would appear too abruptly.
Zu Friseuren habe ich mehr Vertrauen als zu Friseursinnen.
Hat der Charlie schon angerufen?
Nein, aber vorhin auf der Straße habe ich den Frank getroffen. Schon in Ausgehuniform. Mit solchen spitzen Schuhen.
Wer ist denn der Charlie?
Auch ein Soldat.
Und der Frank? Naja, das geht uns ja eigentlich nichts an.
Warum fragen Sie denn, wenn es Sie nichts angeht?
Ich frage nichts mehr. Fragen Sie mich was.
Was sind Sie von Beruf? Detektiv?
Nein, ich bin Sportler.
Also doch, ich habe gewonnen. Ein Boxer?
Ich bin Fußballtormann.
Hast du gehört? Er ist Tormann.
Was ist denn dabei so komisch?
Ja, als wir Sie gestern auf der Straße gesehen haben, da haben wir gewettet, ob Sie Boxer sind oder...
Oder?
Fremdenlegionär.
Fußballer haben alle O-Beine. Wenn bei uns ein Spiel ist, dann stellen wir uns hinter das Tor und machen den Tormann nervös. Unser Tormann hat sich bei einem Zusammenstoß die Oberlippe gespalten.
Jetzt lispelt er.
Mich würde dir nicht so leicht aus der Fassung bringen.
You saw the apple. You saw how my main character was dealing with people and things. You have an impression how dedicated I was to the realm of the visible, the physical. No metaphysics loomed behind the surface. There was no behind. The apple wasn't even metaphorical, like from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. No, what you saw was what you got. Let's jump 15 years ahead. I had learned a great deal in the meantime, and certainly had my share of doubts by now about both materialism and the monopoly of the visible. I want to show you how a very different character deals with people and things. And please pay attention to another special object. In this case, it's not an apple, but a stone. The scene is from Wings of Desire. Juliana mentioned it. When our invisible guardian angel Damiel visits Marion, for whom he will eventually surrender his eternal existence and become mortal.
Enfin dehors, dans la ville, trouver qui je suis devenue. La plupart du temps, je suis trop consciente pour être triste. J'ai attendu une éternité pour que quelqu'un me dise un mot affectueux. Puis je suis partie pour l'étranger. Quelqu'un qui me dirait « Je t'aime tant aujourd'hui ». Ce serait tellement beau. Je regarde devant moi et le monde se lève devant mes yeux, me monte au cœur. Enfant, j'avais le désir de vivre sur une île. Une femme seule, puissamment seule. Oui, c'est ça. Vidé, incompatible, le vide, la peur, la peur. Je regarde un petit animal perdu au coin d'un bois. Qui es-tu? Je ne sais plus. Mais je sais, je ne deviendrai pas trapéziste. Des décisions imprévues auxquelles on croit. Ne pas pleurer. Pas envie de pleurer, mais alors pas envie du tout. Ça arrive, c'est comme ça. Ça va pas toujours comme on veut. Le vide. Le vide. Nichts mehr denken. Être là. Berlin. Ici, je suis étrangère et pourtant tout est si familier. De toute façon, je risque pas de me perdre. On arrive toujours au mieux. J'attendrai une photo devant un photomaton et en sortirai une avec un autre visage. Et ça, ce sera le début d'une histoire. Les visages. J'ai envie de voir les visages. Peut-être je trouve une place de serveuse.
And no one saw the carny go, the weeks flew by. Till they moved on the shore, leaving his caravan behind.
J'ai peur de ce soir.
Was part of
C'est bête.
his
L'angoisse me rend malade. Parce que seule une partie de moi-même est dans l'angoisse. Mais l'autre n'y croit pas.
just so upon the edge.
Comment dois-je vivre?
Away,
peut-être pas ça la question. Comment dois-je penser? Je sais si peu de choses. Peut-être parce que je suis trop curieuse. Je pense souvent de façon si fausse. Parce que je pense comme si je parlais en même temps à quelqu'un d'autre. À l'intérieur des yeux fermés, fermez encore les yeux. Alors même les pierres se mettent à vivre. Être par les couleurs. Die Farbe, die Neonlichter im Abendhimmel, die rote und gelbe S-Bahn. Il me suffit d'être prête et tous les hommes du monde me regarderont. Nostalgie. Nostalgie d'une vague d'amour qui monterait en moi. C'est ça qui ne cesse de me rendre maladroite, l'absence de plaisir. Envie d'aimer. Envie d'aimer.
And the rain came hammering down. Everybody running for their wagons, tying all the canvas flaps down. The mangy cats growling in their cages, the bird girl flapping and squawking in the round. The whole valley reeking of wet beast and rotten sun, a freak and brute creation all packed up and on their way. The three dwarves peering from the wagons behind.
You saw how the realm of the visible had changed for me in the 15 years between the two excerpts. The apple at the time was nothing but an apple. But the stone later was more than a stone. It was the stone itself, if you want. The idea of a stone, it carried all the weight of the world and at the same time defied gravity. Daniel could pick it up and it would still lay there. The goalie didn't know how to deal with women, except jokingly. Daniel, my guardian angel, was able to look into Marion's soul and considerately left her circus wagon when she took off her top. The goalie dealt strictly with what you can see. Wings ventured into the vast territory of the unseen. The fact that movies have access to both is what I want to talk to you about today. And about that general misconception that the visible, for some reason, should be the dominant realm of motion pictures, or of our concern in our lives. I'm not bashing the world of the visible, and preserving people, things, places is still an important function of movies that I'm still dedicated to. Wings of Desire is now a historical document of a city that no longer exists. I'm just challenging that aspect of supremacy that the visible tends to assume. When I checked the scenes that you've just watched, it struck me that they had a curious gesture in common. Both the goalie and the angel put their hands on the shoulder of the women in their respective scenes. Bloch is awkward, self-imposing, trying to dominate. Daniel is utterly respectful. Just like the visible and the invisible, respect or disrespect are two more opposites that define the world of movies, as well as their and our relation to the world. There are other such couples of opposites or contra-distinctions. Care versus a lack of care. Love versus a lack of love. Truth versus a lack of truth. Movies can deal with lots of contrasting, what shall we call them, mindsets. Maybe we better call them attitudes or approaches. By whom? By the filmmakers? Only by them? Before we get more into that, I want to show you another excerpt. We jump 20 more years from Wings of Desire to a film called Invisible Crimes. It was shot for Doctors Without Borders in the Democratic Republic of Congo, at a time when the doctors realized that violence against women had become a real problem, actually a real disease, in areas of conflict. Together with my Swiss cameraman and my American sound engineer, we spent 3 weeks in a God-forsaken place in the middle of nowhere, in a town of 20,000 people called Kabalo, on the bottom third of the Congo River. There was no electricity, no running water, no roads went there anymore, no ships came down along the big river like they had more than 100 years ago, when Joseph Conrad had lived there as a captain of a Belgian steamer taking passengers and colonial goods up the Congo River to the coast. His novel, In the Heart of Darkness, I found out, took place right there in Kabalo. Coppola's amazing Apocalypse Now is based on that book. Doctors Without Borders had a hospital there in the heart of darkness. And me and my crew came in on the supply aircraft that landed every 2 or 3 weeks. There were lots of refugees in the area, some still crossing over from Rwanda, but lots of armed men, too, Mai rebels, militias, official military or police. All of them were considered equally dangerous for women. Women basically couldn't trust any man with a gun. Doctors Without Borders had realized they had to deal with that situation of violence against women as if it were a disease. And our film was trying to help educate doctors, nurses, women, and victims.
Jina langu naitwa Anastasia.
22. Ile hadithi ilifika mwili wakati mdemili sengi. Tulikuwa ng'ambo, tuko nekala, kulikuwa wale baaskari, wale balikuwa naita ba mai, balikuwa pale. Tuko nekala, manake hakukuwa mtu, alikuwa anafanya kila ila kosa yote. Hakukuwa mtu alikuwa anafanya kosa yote ni paka kosa yetu. Ile wakati tuko nekala, bakafika bakakamata bwana yangu. Na wengine bagarsoa bawili bamule mugini. Bakamata pale. Bakaenda nabo busiku. Mfano ni mtoshe makuta, ile makuta mfano mtupashie. Sasa tuna makuta ya kuimupa. Tunafanya nini? Asema hapana, mtoshe tu makuta mfano nini? Mtupashie. Kumbe ni sawa. Si hatuna makuta ya kufanya nini ya kuimupa. Kumbe hivi hamna makuta tafanya nini? Temupika. Tukaanza kuikala. Kumbe pako nabo pale beko ne bapika fimbo paka vile. Hatuna jua, hatuna nani. Banasema sasa mshisogee huku mweba nini? Mweba bibi yao. Ni sawa. Beko ne bapika pale. Beko ne bapika. Mama nakufa. Mama nakufa. Mama nakufa nafanya nini? Shine kaenda fanya. Beko ne bapika vile vile. Kipande bwanangu anazimia. Bakamuweka meza kulukuta paka hivi. Ule kulukuta kwa nyari kwa negamia. Banabeba mwingine vile banaanza kumupika. Banaanza kumupika. Akazimia yule nako bakaanza kuikala. Kisha kuzimia. Kumbe nikaikala hivi tafanya nini? Taweza kupoteza maisha yangu tu bure. Kwa kupata nguvu kidogo ile balipata banafanya nini bakatoka bakakimbia bule bushiku. Wenye balikimbilia hatujui. Bakakuya bushiku wale ba mai 5. Akafika mule mgeni. Bakaniita, toka hapa. Natoka. Tafuta bwana yako, yuko wapi? Bwanangu, mlikuwa kumkamata usiku? Hapana. Hapana, mbatoshi banafanya nini? Habaonekane. Kweli asema ni mzuri. Nyumba hii kama unapenda mfanye nini? Muingie. Bakaingia mu nyumba wote hapa 5. Wale bakaingia mu nyumba. Bakaniita mu nyumba, mule mu nyumba nalikuwa. Alikuwa na mimba ya miezi 3. Nikaingia mu nyumba. Panda huko. Inakuwa mambo gani? Panda paka huko. Inakuwa mambo gani? Nikapanda kule. Wakanilalisha manchari paka hivi. Bakaanza kunifaa muri force. Bwana yangu hana hapo. Na katoto. Kenya nalikuwa nako. Na mimba ya miezi 3. Bakanifaa muri force. Shiyo sasa ni bantu ngapi? Bale bantu nalikuwa nako. Shiyo sasa ni bantu ngapi? Nazimia, sijitambua asema niko wapi. Niko nekala mtu paka hivi mwekusha kufa. Sijitambua asema niko nekala wapi. Kaanza kukala pale damu kuna niko paka mtumbo. Na mimba ikafanya ikatoka ndani ya tumbo. Kuwaza juu yao. Manake nafanya tu kama nebaona hivi. Roho inapasha na niluma ndani ya tumbo. Juu na sasa balinifanya kitendo kibaya. Ni kunyaribisha maisha. Ashiki. Na hapa pa dunia unaikala paka uzali.
Miaka yami ndi 12 uyu nyota tamba kumulongo alivita amaimai amutali neshinga bailena mukitengo bamukwete kumukwala amene anyemene asalike venda nani yokava kamutahide kimwene kiti kushira mkimundi mwavuka kunyemena kuti bamama nako kwenda kuti mama nandi kwata anyemene abamose nandi bafumu ya vita ya nani yaba maimai nashara bungabu wami nevena baimba babili kitutumpa kisha kutumpa hoha na abanyemena kwabo ndakomba kwa matamoka abanyemena kwabo nashara bungabu wami nebana baimbanga babili bashile bayema kumuso kwa akumuasa ho nshine bana babili bonga natumpa kwana katamba mwana bekunji wana katambi nashimulubishi pupa ne basola 7 basola 7 basoda basatu abalonga bamabasakile imba yo naye akufa nebana kihandanga kufika ho habi basoda basaba banshija nebumi nelufu sakika amimba kiyukile bana yo basoda bali nemata amina mine civil asa nongana minyi bale nonke musakira ke bano ebene basoda la basatu abaluma basakile nalalanga yafashi yangitalukile kulalanga yafashi yayo nikalando tanga bayami uya unkunga nebana banashere nabo bakalandota mana gidi kuweza maka maisha amudume mongo moshika tanga neba abana babiri babanshile nabo emishanga baba babiri bongo mana susora masusu abahita.
I realized, making that film, that as much as films can show the presence of someone or something, they can also show their or its absence. Presence and absence, another pair of those opposites. In the fields, planting or harvesting the crops, or collecting wood, by the water holes or by the Congo River, getting water, you only saw the presence of women and children. Men were absent in those workplaces. On the soccer field or on the makeshift basketball terrain in the evening, lounging in the shadows of the trees during the day, or in the only movie theater in town, powered by a flimsy little generator, which operated a DVD recorder and a flat screen, that's where you'd see the men and the older boys. Women were absent in those places of leisure. Violence against women in areas of conflict was a subject that both needed the strong presence of women for their courageous testimonies, which miraculously had no traces of self-pity whatsoever, as well as it needed to reveal their absence in the public eye, the eyes of men. The constant crimes of rape and violence had made women become invisible, literally, because they had erased their dignity, their identities, their social existence. The film tried to find another language for this heartbreaking contrast of being visible and invisible at the same time. I say another language because the doctors had produced a previous film that had dealt with the same subject. which had also contained testimonies, but had rather treated them via reenactments. I had to make the doctors understand that this was utterly counterproductive, not to say disastrous. To hear these gruesome stories was bad enough. You didn't want to see them depicted, come to life a second time. They were doctors, not filmmakers, so I felt like I had to start from scratch to teach them some of the basics of my craft. Whatever a film reveals, whatever materializes on the screen is what that film becomes, very often against its best intentions. A film cannot really distance itself from what it shows. It's almost impossible to depict violence without enhancing it, just as well as it's almost impossible to make a film against war that would show war without somehow glorifying it. Here's another one of these conflicting pairs of principles today: attraction versus repulsion. When we had finished shooting the film with the women and were waiting for the supply plane to come and take us away again, I had some time left, and I spent it in that little makeshift theater in Caballo. In hindsight, it was really about that subject of attraction versus repulsion. We had to shoot some of it in infrared on our consumer cameras because we shot in the total dark. After 30 years of war, in the first year of peace, in that theater in Caballo, they only showed war movies. The Pied Pipers walking by in the end, they were the recruiters of new soldiers. The eyes of children are even more incapable to distinguish between violence and the depiction of violence. All these opposites, visible, invisible, presence, absence, respect, disrespect, attraction, repulsion, lead me to my main question today. What is it that you remember from the movies you've seen? Think of your favorite film. What has remained? What is it that you treasure? Picture it. I'm sure you cannot see it in front of your inner eye, shot by shot, so to speak, with dialogue, music, sound, framing, camera moves. No. Then your brains would be data storage units. What you remember is what that film left you with, evoked in you, or should I rather say, provoked in you. What is it? A certain feeling, a distinct mood, the film's message in a nutshell. Maybe you can still recall vaguely some of its imagery and sense the emotion again, which that particular film caused. So I ask you again, what is your memory of your favorite film? I'm pretty sure it's more how you feel about that film or what you thought of it afterwards than what it actually is. And this is my next question. What exactly is a film anyway? Is it a print? Or in our digital age, a DVD? A Blu-ray? A file on your computer? A streaming link? The sum of what's written about it? Its place in film history? Its writers, directors, and producers' intention? A program in your local Cineplex? 2 hours accessible on Netflix? The more you think about it, the more it will become obvious to you, and to me too, that the real existence of films is a pretty diffuse and tricky issue. How and where do movies exist, live, continue living, survive, persist? In our current culture and society, most things are defined by ownership. So the existence of movies can quickly be reduced to their rights, which would make films products that are owned by their right holders. Those are studios, distributors, or production companies. I do have my doubts, though, that this is really helpful in establishing a proper answer about how and where films exist. Maybe I should not ask you, but myself. After all, I produced almost all my movies in the best tradition of cinéma d'auteur, in which writer, director, and producer are one and the same person. In fact, I owned, or at least co-owned, most of my films. But I never felt they were products. For me, in my mind, they represented forms of expression. Each of them the result of a complex process of translating contemporary life into a narrative flow of images in which places, characters, biographies, and storylines all came together. so they could be passed on to a rather unknown entity called the audience. This mysterious act happens in collaboration with actors, craftsmen, writers, musicians, together with other co-producers, distributors, exhibitors, who all contribute to create a form of expression versus a product. Be that as it may, my ownership ended one day. Yep, a long and sad story in which I lost the rights to all these movies. For 10 years, I watched them from a distance, like a parent separated from his children. I felt like these movies were now orphans, which indeed they were somehow. They were owned by an entity that tried to make the most of them, meaning let them generate as much income as possible to produce return on investment. My ownership had not protected these forms of expression from turning into products. But that difficult time of my life was also a great learning process. I realized that my movies couldn't be defined through my authorship or rights, nor any other market terms, and certainly not through my attachment to them. In that time when they were free-floating, so to speak, out of my hands, I had to realize they still had a life. Most of all, they still had their audience. I came to terms with the fact that they were independent now and had grown up, and that their future existence was not as my children. As such, I had lost them, but that they now belonged to a whole different entity or universe, which I would only vaguely describe, as it dawned on me, as a collective memory, the sum of the appreciation of all the people to whom these films meant something. That was a humbling realization, but also a very liberating one. I quickly realized that these films had to be freed from any ownership, that they had to somehow transition to a different form of existence. In fact, nobody should own them, including myself. If possible, they should belong to that authority called the public. Thus, they would own themselves, so to speak. And the money that they would generate in the future would help them to take care of their own future, be preserved and restored, which in some cases was badly necessary. Most of these films were from the analog age, and to have a future, they needed to be transferred as carefully as possible into the digital age. Such ideal ownership, I found out, actually existed. In the form of a non-profit foundation, these films could find a home that would allow them to take care of themselves. My wife and I formed such a foundation, and then, with the help of my home city, my home state, and private funding, this foundation bought back all these orphaned movies, freed them from their money-making slavery, set them free to own themselves, and thus, finally, belong to their rightful ownership, that collective memory. So, the one thing that had become very clear in that hard time was a simple truth that films only exist when they're being watched. I'm not referring to such a hopeless general notion like the audience. If the act of seeing creates existence, it can't be that act as such, because we see a lot of useless stuff. I'm talking about the individual and conscious act of seeing by somebody with a curious or open or even caring look. An indifferent look doesn't create, nor capture, nor store anything. Only that particular look of which we claim that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, the loving look. That is what makes movies exist and come to life. It also defines the very place of their existence, the eyes of their beholders. Now, this is the same with books, right? Only more obviously so. Books do not exist as volumes on the shelves, but in the imagination of their readers. Charles Dickens is long dead, but in front of your inner eyes, in your act of reading, Oliver Twist and David Copperfield live on, re-emerge. I'm not saying Dickens had nothing to do with it. He wrote those lines you're reading. The written lines are still strictly the author's responsibility, but reading between the lines of every book you ever opened was and is up to you. That all-important area in between, that is where public territory resides. Reading between the lines, that's how and where you contribute your own experience, your own memories, your imagination, and all your associations. This is the vast kingdom of appropriation. You make something your own by dreaming yourself into it, which takes us right back to the world of movies, the proverbial dream factory. In movies too, you're reading between the frames and shots and images. You grasp them just like you grasp a novel's words, and you put all the information together to form a meaning. That meaning develops as you relate it to the meaning of the next shot, and so on, following the editing, the grammar of that film. Films are complex structures in time, and each shot is its own little time cell, its little brick of time, as the whole film becomes a building in time. Filmmakers and architects really have a lot in common, Juliana. Just like books, some movies leave ample space between the lines, between the frames, in the ongoing flow of images. Others leave little space in between to enter and to dream yourself into. Those movies are sort of wall-to-wall systems. No wonder you also don't remember much about them. They block your view, so to speak. They're less generous. Generosity leaves ample space, stinginess little. And here we have another one of these couples of opposites. Generosity versus stinginess. Before we go on, I want to show you one of my all-time favorite movie scenes. The end of Truffaut's Fahrenheit 451, based on the novel by Ray Bradbury.
Are you interested in Plato's Republic?
Well, I am Plato's Republic. I'll recite myself for you whenever you like.
Thank you very much. Now here's Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. And here's The Corsair by Byron. She used to be married to a chief of police. Now that skinny fellow is Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Where's Alice through the looking glass today? She should be somewhere about. Ah, now there's The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. He ate his book so they couldn't burn it. Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. Oh, you see the little blonde coming towards us. Watch her blush.
I'm Jean-Paul Sartre's The Jewish Question. Delighted to meet you. I'm The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury.
Allow me to introduce.
Oh, may I? The Pickwick Papers, Charles Dickens.
Oh, Charles Dickens. Once I read a book he wrote. David Copperfield.
We have a David Copperfield amongst us.
He's with another group in the South. I Am the Prince by Machiavelli.
Oh.
As you see, you can't judge a book by its cover.
I am Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice.
I am Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice.
Both of you the same book?
My brother is Volume 1.
My brother is Volume 2.
It's a great pleasure to meet you.
We call the first one Pride, the other one's Prejudice. I don't think they like it much. Yeah, we're only 50 or so, but there are many, many more scattered around. In abandoned railway yards, wandering the roads, tramps outwardly, but inwardly libraries. Oh, it wasn't planned. It just so happened that a man here, a man there, loved some book. And rather than lose it, he learned it. And we came together. We're a minority of undesirables crying out in the wilderness. But it won't always be so. One day we shall be called on one by one to recite what we've learned. And then books will be printed again. And when the next age of darkness comes, those who come after us will do again as we have done.
I have one with me.
Yes?
What is it? Let me see. Tales of Mystery and Imagination by Edgar Allan Poe.
Now learn it quickly so that we can burn it.
You burn it?
Yes, of course, we have to, so that no one can take them away from us.
Yes, we burn the books. But we keep them up here, where nobody can find them. As a matter of fact, we've just burned the Memoirs of Saint-Simon. You see, Montag? That man over there hasn't much longer to live.
He's The Weir of Hermiston by Robert Louis Stevenson. The boy is his nephew. He's now reciting himself so the boy can become the book.
I will be very quiet, replied Archie, and I will be boldly frank. I do not love my father. I wonder sometimes if I do not hate him.
I will be very quiet, replied Archie, and I will be boldly frank. I do not love my father. I wonder sometimes if I do not hate him.
There's my shame, perhaps my sin. At least and in the sight of God, not my fault.
There's my shame, perhaps my sin. At least and in the sight of God, not my fault.
How was I to love him? He has never spoken to me, never smiled upon me. I do not think he ever touched me.
How was I to love him? He has never spoken to me, never smiled upon me, and I do not think he ever touched me.
He was more afraid of death than of anything else, and he died as he thought he would, while the first snows of winter fell.
He was more afraid of death than of anything else.
And he died.
And he died while the first.
He died as he thought.
And he died as he thought.
As he thought he would.
As he thought he would, while the first snows of winter fell. I do not love my father. I wonder sometimes if I do not hate him. There's my shame, perhaps my sin, at least, and in the sight of God, not my fault. How was I to love him? He has never spoken to me, never smiled upon me, and I do not think he ever touched me. He was more afraid of death than of anything else, and he died as he thought he would, while the first snows of winter fell.
Ето бил господин, молодых лет, чопорный,
Pagaiskaisi katmuutsinesti. Hanno kwengi nani kato sempre. Le risposte che andava la festa alla Madonna di
15 au 16 janvier 1675.
I'm going to relate a tale full of horror.
De Saint-Simon, père de France, et sa seconde femme, Charlotte de Louvois, Unique de Sully, de Diane de Boudot, première femme de mon père. Il avait tout,
That is oppressive, but not a chronic.
et pas de garçon. Il avait marié en Dulcinea del Toro.
Down. How much there is to tell.
At that moment, Mr. Pickwick was around.
What moves me so much about the ending of Fahrenheit 451 is that books no longer exist. They have actually become invisible, and that people, with their own lives, their own voices and faces, turn into those books. What remains visible is memory. Memory as such, of course, is invisible, but the act of remembering makes it tangible, durable, existing. As we leave the realm of books again and return to movies, you are the readers in this case. You are the projectionists of films. Because by watching them, by projecting your own hopes and dreams into them, by absorbing and filling the invisible spaces that movies leave open, by reading between the frames, you perpetuate those films. With the help of Truffaut and Bradbury, a filmmaker and a writer, I'm finally arriving, after some detours, at the answer of my initial question about what it is that you remember from the movies you've seen, and about the place of the existence and the ownership of movies. And even if there's an element of utopia involved in the excerpt of Fahrenheit 451 that you just saw, as well as in the form of existence that my own movies were able to move in, I want to sum up my quest. The empty space between the lines in movies, between the lines in books, between the frames and shots in movies, that is common territory between the writers or filmmakers and the readers or watchers. It is co-ownership, co-authorship. You are the rightful owners of movies you want to hold on to. You are the shareholders, the preservers, the protectors, the beneficiaries, the docking stations. This is what I call the invisible potential of films that accompanies all their visible features. All images have that double existence. They show you something, places, people, action, plot, the surface of things, and they evoke something that you might not see at first because you have to add it yourself. And only then it has an effect in you, will continue living in you in one way or another. We are the sum of everything we experience. Don't you forget that when you see movies. We filmmakers can only show you something that is invisible if you're ready to lift the veil to see it. If we invest love into a scene, it's in vain if you look at it with cynical eyes. If we leave generous space for you to dream yourself into it and you don't fill it, it's wasted. The visible realm is only the surface. Films have access to so much more. It's like with icebergs. 1/8 is above the water, the visible. 7/8 are under the water, invisible, but there. You'll definitely know it when you collide with it. So, you have to imagine that bigger part. And all those opposites we collected along the way have such an invisible part that you have to use and bring out to light. Generosity versus stinginess. Respect versus disrespect. Care versus lack of care. Love versus lack of love. Truth versus lack of truth. Presence versus absence. Attraction versus repulsion. Form of expression versus product. And in these Easter days for Christians, even immortality versus mortality. The existence, the importance, and the impact of all these options are up to you to evaluate and give place to in your eyes and in your lives. There's always space for you to enter. There's always a crack. I leave the conclusion to somebody else who knows a lot about the visible and the invisible.
Thank you so much, friends. We're so privileged to be able to gather in moments like this when so much of the world is plunged in darkness and chaos. So, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for this enlightening, should I say, lecture on not only your films, but on the medium and the art of film in general. We have some time for questions, and those of you who'd like to ask them, there are microphones both in this side of the auditorium and also up there, which we can hardly see, but we'll try. And if you don't mind to line up to ask some questions, and I guess I will just begin as you gather your thoughts. I was really very much pleased and struck and interested in the way in which you describe film, not simply as a visual medium or speaking about visibility or the eye as the only way to approach film. And I was wondering, in some way, rather than juxtaposing the visible and the invisible, if we moved away from the idea of the eye itself as a kind of sight of distance. When you look at something, there's always a distance between you and the person, the object you're looking at. And whether the kind of redemption of physical reality that you were talking about through Krakauer isn't a function of touch. You show a lot of hands, a lot of connections being made by way of other senses, including the sense of touch, not just physical touch, but as a way of being in touch, in contact with people. And so I'm wondering if kind of shifting our way of thinking about visual mediums in ways that involved a closer connection that cannot be even had by way of the eye is something you would subscribe to.
It's all about touch, only that touch is just not only
physical, right?
Touch is something that happens if you share something. And filmmaking is a job that is totally impossible without sharing. Already, you share a lot when you're on the set. You cannot make a movie alone. And even if you could, it wouldn't lead to much because you want somebody to be touched.
In return, yes.
In return. So filmmaking is really not made with tools and cameras and God knows what. Filmmaking is done with all these things I called up, with respect, with love, with care, with expression. It's made out of all these things that need you to respond to it, because otherwise there is no cinema.
What about music? What about the closeness, not just to the physical touch or the being in touch, but in your films, as a way of communicating emotion and affect, there is not only the touching in terms of this being in contact with, but this more diffuse sense of being in a space, in a kind of tuning or attuning, almost like a Stimmung that you create in different ways, not only with the eye and the touch, but also by way of your use of music and your love of music.
The musician is in the same position as a poet or a filmmaker. His touch is happening differently. He plays an instrument to touch you, and he believes in something that he conveys to you, and he shares something with you, and of course rhythm is something you can get into and is very intoxicating. Sometimes I wish I had rhythm at my disposal as a filmmaker.
You do.
Yeah, you do maybe sometimes.
You always do.
But you cannot just shake your asses to it.
No, that's true.
And sometimes I really envy musicians, frankly. These old guys in Havana, well, they suffered greatly, but they believed in what they were doing. And they moved us all, literally, even behind the camera. We were shaking our asses.
There's a question there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I wanted to thank you first for all of your movies, and one in particular that was incredibly meaningful to me because I adored Pina Bausch, and your film of her, I saw it in Paris and I just sat in the cinema and sobbed. But it really helped me to grieve her passing, because to just experience the wonderful thing that was her life and her creativity with all of the people that you interviewed, and your film was really beautiful and lovely. I have one question, and that is, this morning when I was thinking about coming to see you, suddenly Jean Vigo's La Talente came into my mind when I was thinking about Wings of Desire, and I wondered if, and then seeing the movie about, in Uganda, I think, seeing the women appearing and disappearing, I was wondering if you think about that film at all. There's the illusion with the two lovers together and they're not together. And,
It's one of my all-time favorite movies. La Talente, I hope some of you have seen. Jean Vigo is a very forgotten filmmaker, but I'm very sure that here at the Harvard Film Archives you can watch him. And the name of the ship in my last film, Submergence, is Atalante, coming out later this year. And the film is I could have shown that film instead of my entire speech. But I figured it was not going to be good enough for you. So, and as far as Pina Bausch is concerned, my next lecture, Poetry in Motion, is very much dealing with Pina and her art. I just figured it was better in this order, and I would first need to speak about some of the principles before I got into some of the more concrete things, like poetry. So I hope you hold on and stay next time, because then we'll speak about Pina.
Omi?
Thank you very much. And thank you for asking the question about memory. And then working through different kinds of memory. The memory from reading, the memory from watching. In fact, the way I saw the films enacting the problem you talked about, which is the problem of thinking and reading between the lines or in the interstices, was the way in which you showed both the visible and the invisible, the ethical and the non-ethical, as a palimpsest rather than as an opposition. So that in the first movie that you showed, which you said was about the tangible and the object, here he was touching everything. There was a kind of affirmation of reality, but she really understood the point. She said, why do you keep getting up and down? What are you doing? So there was the invisible psychic anxiety, in a sense, which we saw him in anyway, inside, within him anyway, being enacted. And of course, in the Congo film, I think you very deliberately, in a way, showed some of the figures in a sort of quite a transparent way, imposed upon the landscape, within the landscape, with other figures who are more substantial. And it seemed to me that you really answered that question very beautifully. It's because both systems move together, the tangible and the intangible, that somehow in between them, we develop the memory. I just wanted to thank you about that and ask you whether you felt that rather than the oppositional, there was a kind of palimpsestic presence of these oppositions you talked. The one can be visible within the other or experienced through the other. Thank you very much.
Yeah, obviously, you can't even try to show the invisible without showing something that is visible. And movies are this incredible passage between these two worlds. And every reality that you affirm opens your eyes to another one behind. So I didn't know that in the beginning. You see, I started out when I was young, strictly believing in everything that was and that I could touch, like my goalkeeper. My eyes wanted to touch everything and be affirmed that the world existed and was there. And I was appalled by the idea that anything should be behind. And that's a learning process. And by now it's almost the other way around. I feel that you cannot show anything without showing a vast universe behind each thing. And obviously, all these opposites, one doesn't exist without the other. Thank you.
Up there.
Thank you very much for that very moving lecture. I have a question I'm almost hesitant to ask. It's almost impossible to put into words, but I'm going to try.
I'm with you.
There's something in your movies that sometimes to some people makes them seem boring, and to me, it's also what makes them seem unforgettable. And it's very hard for me to say what it is, but it's in The Left-Handed Woman when a woman is in her apartment on a date and she starts ignoring the man and starts paying attention to her child. And it's in Wings of Desire, in the poem that begins Von der Kind ein Kind war. And it's in Paris, Texas, when Harry Dean Stanton is cleaning boots. And it's some sort of appreciation for existence itself. And I just wondered if you could speak to that, even though it's almost impossible to ask.
You brought up another interesting pair, huh? Boring and unforgettable. But it's right there. Right there. If you want to talk about life, you can not only talk about exciting stuff. Life is not only exciting things, life is also cleaning shoes, like Travis is so happy to do, because he feels he can make himself useful. Life is something sometimes extremely ordinary, and my favorite filmmaker of all times, the Japanese Yasujiro Ozu, never showed anything exciting. He only showed family life. Fathers and mothers and kids and children and grandparents, and only ordinary life. And it's the most exciting body of work, I think, in the whole world of movies. So life, if it's not boring, it's not unforgettable. Thank you for that new, I have to build that in.
Up there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your lecture. I was really interested in the part that you mentioned of including visibility and invisibility in your films, and how you were blending them as if there was no duality. I was wondering, applying that to the context nowadays where you see a lot of hatred going on, where you see different wars emerging, how can you use this concept of non-duality to approach some current topics through filmmaking in a way that it doesn't necessarily, as you were mentioning, enhances war or enhances this hate speech and let's say other topics that could further get people into this negative mood? Thank you.
Oh, you don't have easy questions, right?
That's hard.
I think it's increasingly difficult to make movies these days. because they're increasingly useless, considering what is happening all around. So, after 50 years of trying to make something useful, I think I finally did something useful. My wife said I rehearsed 50 years to make this one movie. I made a film that's going to come out in May here with Pope Francis. And there's a man who, in spite of all the negativity all around the world, says everything that is simple and right and just and lives it. And I figured in a world where nobody believes anything anymore, it was worthwhile showing a man of his word, and that's the title of the film. So I didn't know anymore which story I could tell, so I followed a man who proved that filmmaking, to me, filmmaking can still reveal truth. And I spoke about truth and the absence of truth, and it's a huge matter, because every story, every fiction has the presence of truth in it. I don't mean I always laugh if a movie starts and says, after a true story. I think that's absurd. How can a story be true? A story in itself is not true. So if it says after a true story, it tries to make me believe, before it even starts, that this film is dealing with the truth. And that, if it's like commercials, as soon as they have to tell me that they're telling the truth, I don't believe it's the truth anymore. So, but every fiction has its truth. Every story has its truth. Every situation has its truth. And it's just not happening without you with your eyes and your heart grabbing it and saying yes to it. Otherwise, it's a lost cause. But your questions are really getting increasingly difficult.
We could take two less existential questions if we're
Thank you. I believe in you, yes.
Yes, I think she'll.
Thank you.
Can.
Thank you. Maybe mine won't count, so it's because it's an affirmation. I wasn't going to say anything at all. I was speechlessly moved. Thank you so much. But since you brought up music, I am a musician, and I want to affirm that in an effective performance communication, there is a lot of space between the notes, and that's what, and the communication with an attentive audience. And that also, just as a lover of theater and film, I would also like to affirm, which I'm sure you know much better than many people, that there is this sense of pacing and rhythm in the way images move, and even I had this experience of editing a film of one of my concerts recently, or helping somebody, and just how long should that intermission panel be, you know, and how should this, I mean, it felt to me as a musician that there was a lot of breath, timing, pacing in that visual attempt to, you know, put some meaning into whatever I was presenting, so. Thank you. I just wanted to share that.
But you see, the breath that something has, a scene has a certain breath, and the space in between is almost another word for breath. And the space in between that the musician creates with each sound and with each melody is a space in between you and the ears of the listeners. So the breath is the whole secret of filmmaking, of poetry, of painting. The breath is what communicates. It's between, it's if somebody can start breathing in your rhythm, then you have communication. And in filmmaking, the breath is in the editing. And if you edit so that there is no breathing left in between, then you suffocate the audience and they only see what you want them to see instead of dreaming yourself into it. Because the space that they need in order to add themselves, that's sometimes they can learn a lot from musicians about that and from poets. And it's almost indescribable if you sit there in your editing room and you have all the stuff you've shot, right? And then you put it together and then you realize you can put it together so there's no space in between and it's just tight. And you can put it together that there is air. And only if there's air, there's breath. And only if there's air, as Leonard Cohen says, there is a crack in it. So creating the cracks in between so that the light can come in, that's the job of a filmmaker and an editor. And I think musicians are very good at that. Can we have the last question?
Yes.
Hi. Speaking of one, how's that?
Cool.
So I just saw The American Friend again at the Harvard Film Archive, and right after the film, I came out with a friend with whom I'd seen it. I was just commenting and was just really startled by the color in that film and the saturation. And when I walked out into Harvard Square, this was after the conversation with my friend. I looked up and I think it's like the only neon light still in Harvard Square is over the Hong Kong restaurant. And
I'd check it out.
It's right, and it's like I had never seen that sign before. It just blazed in the night for me after seeing that film. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, the other direction. Is that something that you're aware of when you're making a film? How you might operate on my mind in that sense? And, I think of that orange Volkswagen, and also I have to say the Paris Metro in 1976 looks a whole lot better than the T does here now. So just those changes in perception, if you could talk about that, please.
The American Friend, for those who've seen it, was a movie in which I, for the first time, really made a film in color. And for my cameraman and myself, we tried to make a film that had no predecessors in terms of lighting and in terms of coloring and in terms of color dramaturgy. And it was the first film that was lit with neon light. We had neon lights behind the camera. Robbie invented a lighting that didn't exist before with fluorescent lights. So the whole film had a very electric feel about it and became a model for many other directors of photography afterwards. We just enjoyed ourselves and we felt modern times was neon lights. And I'm really looking forward to seeing a couple of films with you guys at the Harvard Film Archives. I think I see Wings of Desire with you in Paris, Texas. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I really look forward to discussing these in details because now we can just quickly sort of get into this. And I could talk to you for a long time about the colors in American Friend because the film lives on these colors and that's its food. That's where its characters are thriving on, and the color dramaturgy of the film is something that we can go on forever. And I could talk about Edward Hopper for a long time with you, because that was the film I made after I discovered the paintings of Edward Hopper, who at this time in Europe was completely unknown. Up to today, there is not a single painting of Hopper in Europe, and nobody even knew about him. And I met his first paintings in New York, and I said, I want to make a film that looks a little bit like it. And that became American Friend.
Oh, no, we have... Okay.
Just to thank you for that moment of beauty. I got caught up in my question, and I just wanted to express
So let's thank them all together. I think that's...
Thank you, guys.